Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Icon Online. So good to have all of you here with us this morning. We'll kind of give people a couple minutes to hop on here. Good morning to everyone in the chat. I hope you all are doing well. Why don't you let us know how you're doing this wonderful, steamy, hot morning here in Texas. This past week, Dan and I and the kids went to Missouri to the Ozarks for our family vacation, and it was a little bit cooler there, which, you know, when the high is like 98 and you're like, oh, this actually feels really good because it's been like 105, 106, you know, at home, then you know you live in a very, very hot climate. So I hope you are all staying cool. I got an email about like our electric bill that's due in August, and I almost passed out when I saw the amount because I literally think it's the highest we've ever paid for a utility bill since we've lived in Texas. So yeah, Steven said it's humid in Maryland. The humidity makes it worse. Like it just does. It just makes it worse. But well, anyway, I'm happy to be here this morning. I'm still trying to recover. If any of you have traveled with children, like done a trip with kids, you know that it's not so much a vacation as it is a trip. Just because it's not exactly always very relaxing, but we had a great time, spent some good time together as a family. But we did get in late last night, so if I have like some dark circles under my eyes, that's why. It's because, you know, I'm a little tired, but grateful to be here. Happy to be with all of you on this Sunday morning. We are going to do things a little bit differently this morning. So, because I was on vacation this past week, I wasn't tending to a lot of work-related things, and the past couple of weeks we've gotten a couple notifications from YouTube about copyright issues having to do with worship, which we shouldn't because we pay to have a license to be able to use the worship songs that we use, but there's been a little bit of an issue, and so I opted to not have worship this morning until I'm able to contact YouTube, just because I don't want to like have any violations or have the stream get messed up, because we have to deal with that enough without the copyright violations. So this morning we are going to forego our typical worship time with Arlene, but instead what I kind of wanted to do here for a couple of minutes is just kind of give you all a chance. And I know there's a little bit of a delay from when like I'm talking to when you're hearing it, so there might be a little bit of awkward silence here, but I would just love to know if there is anyone you know, in the chat today, anybody watching. Amanda said, can you sing to us instead? I mean, I could, but it wouldn't be very enjoyable for anybody, particularly me, because it would be really embarrassing. That is a gift I do not have. So, but anyway, I thought we could just take a moment, and if anybody would like to in the chat, if you want to just share any joys or concerns you have. So either things maybe going on that you would love for your church family to be able to, you know, hold you in our thoughts, to be able to pray for you, to stand in solidarity with you. If there's anything going on in your life right now that you could just use some community and you could use some people standing in solidarity with you, I would love to invite you to share that in the chat if you're comfortable doing so that we can rally around you as a faith community. Or if there are some things that you are experiencing right now, some things that have happened in your life that are bringing you joy, that are maybe ways in which you are experiencing goodness or experiencing provision or experiencing love and grace and faithfulness or any of those things, I would love to hear about those as well. I know that, you know, oftentimes in the heaviness of life, sometimes it's really important that we stop and celebrate the good. So yeah, just I would love for anyone who wants to share anything can go ahead and just share that in the chat. If you would like prayer this morning, you can also click on that prayer button, and one of our hosts can meet you in goes to a separate window where you can share those prayer requests and those things that are weighing heavily on your heart, and so that people can pray with you. And while I'm giving everyone a chance to do that, we'll just go over a couple of our usual orders of business. First thing being, if you are new or if you haven't yet had the opportunity to do so, we'd love to ask you to fill out a Connect card. That's just so that we can add you to our database and you can get on our email list. We send out one email a week just with all things Icon news in the email. So it lets you know when we have in-person services coming up. It lets you know if we have special events coming up. Things like that. Like, for instance, this Thursday evening, we are, as a church, inviting anyone who wants to come and join us. We're going to be at Summer in the Park in San Marcos. They do a summer concert series. So at 7 o'clock Thursday evening, you bring your own chairs. You can bring a cooler with drinks and snacks, blankets, whatever. Bring the kiddos. It's a totally family-friendly thing. And we'll just gather together there and just kind of hang out, spend some time together, and have some fun. So for things like that, if you are not in our database and you would like to be able to stay informed on things, go ahead and fill out that Connect card. And then secondly, to all of you who continue to faithfully and generously give to Icon, thank you, thank you, thank you. It is no secret. I think sometimes in church, like, we try to dance around it, but we all know that the way that churches continue is by the people who are a part of it giving what we're able of our resources to be able for the church to continue. So thank you to all of you who continue to give. If you would like to give this morning, you can also click on the give button that will be in the chat, and it will take you to our new giving platform on Church Teams, where you can either sign up for recurring giving. That's just kind of nice because then you don't have to really think about it. You can just choose an amount, pick the date you want it to be taken out of your account. That's what I do, because if I don't do that, I forget to pay bills. So that's really helpful for me. Or you can just click on that give button and you can just go and give a one-time gift if you would like to do that this morning. So, okay, well, we will go ahead and move forward. If you still have any joys or concerns you want to share, you can feel free to do that. But again, no pressure. You've just okay, there's a joy. Janine just shared a joy. Sharing joy this morning. Each time I join the coffee chat before the service, it's like a breath of fresh air to see everyone, to share our hearts, and just know there is a community that cares. Means more than you could possibly know. Oh, and Stephen said, honestly, this church community has brought me joy. Hannah and I struggled to connect with faith during COVID, but this church community, even though far from Maryland, has made us feel so loved. Oh, Janine and Stephen, honestly, same. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to have gotten the chance to get to know the two of you and to have you be a part of this faith community. It just still continues to blow my mind that the connections that have been made with people across the country, and just the ways that this community has continued to bring healing for so many, myself included. So I am with you. I am so grateful for this community, so very much. Icon group road trip to Maryland. Ooh, seriously, we need to we've talked about this before, we need to have a tour where we find where all the different people who are joining us from around the nation, and then we do a tour and we go and visit everybody. That would be amazing. But thank you guys for sharing those joys. You can feel free to continue to share that, and I'll try to come back to it a little bit later. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go into today's message. I know it's not quite as smooth of a segue or transition without having some music beforehand, but that's okay. It's all good. Okay, so for the past few weeks, we've been doing a series called Money Matters, and today is week 3. And in this series, we are talking about money and wealth, and really how we as followers of Jesus can work to build a Jesus-centered financial ethic. I get it that conversations about money and faith can be hard. And oftentimes the reason for that is because the way that the concept of giving and generosity have often been weaponized and mishandled within the church at large. And so I realize that can be part of the reason why these conversations are tricky. And also just because I think money has so many feelings and emotions and things attached to it that it can just be a very loaded and very difficult conversation at times. And so for the past couple weeks, the first week, Pastor Sabrina talked about the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew scriptures, and kind of talked about ways that money and wealth was discussed in the Old Testament. And then last week, Pastor Craig talked about the New Testament and some financial ideas and ways to steward money and wealth that we see within the New Testament. And so today what I want to do is I want to take a little bit and share some things with you, some kind of personal stories and things, and then also dive into some ways that we can apply this. What does it mean for us as Jesus followers, as Christians? What does it look like for us to build a Jesus-centered financial ethic? And so I think that as a whole, when I was thinking about this, I think in the past, every sermon that I've ever preached about money, most sermons that I have heard preached about money, I think often the focal point of those teachings really is around the idea of giving and generosity, which isn't a bad thing. Generosity is a very good thing. But I think as a whole, it's not very often that at least in my experience, that I have heard churches really teach about what Jesus actually had to say about money and possessions, and kind of the hard truths and hard teachings around that we see in Jesus's teachings. And again, I do believe that generosity is a beautiful and necessary concept that we need to speak on. We need to call each other to live generous lives. I think that matters, and I think that shows that's like a byproduct of understanding that we belong to each other, and it's a loving and good thing to do. But if we truly want to follow the teachings of Jesus in a way that impacts how we live and that leads us to creating a better world, then our conversations about money must move beyond just a conversation about being generous. We have to have conversations about accumulating wealth. We have to have conversations about how wealth and money so easily lead to corruption. And we have to talk about what does that mean for us as we're trying to build this Jesus-centered ethic, knowing these things to be true about money. What does that mean for us? And lately, this is something that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about. It's just kind of something that I feel like just that the Spirit is sort of pinpointed. You know how like you'll go through seasons where it's like there's just certain things that you feel like the Spirit is just sort of kind of pressing on a little bit in your life and bringing to your attention and lovingly saying, I think you need to examine the ways that you see this. And so this is how it's been for me with money lately, and how I relate to money. That's really been on my mind. And as we look around at our world, and if we're really paying attention, it's clear to us that money matters. Money is a big deal. Money in and of itself it's not moral or immoral. Money is just simply a tool. It's a necessary tool that, especially in our structure in our society, and Craig talked about this last week a little bit, but I mean, money is how we trade goods and services. Like it's part of the system that we are within. You have to have it to survive. You have to have money to eat and to have shelter and to have your basic human needs met. So clearly it's a necessary tool. And it's also clear that as a nation, as a society, as a world, that we have a lot of problems in regards to money. I'm a part of it's really beautiful and special to me, but it's a Patreon community that's led by my friend Corey Leak. And in this community, we are having a lot of conversations about what it looks like to build a better world. And Corey uses this phrase, contending for a better world. And this whole phrase is speaking to me really deeply lately, because I think in order to contend for a better world, that idea has to permeate into every area of our lives. And as I continue to follow Jesus and to develop my worldview and my ethic through the lens of my faith, I am continually moving away from the individualistic perspective that I used to hold, and I am being pulled more and more, I would say, by the Spirit, pulled more and more towards a communally driven perspective. And there was an episode of Corey's podcast. I was gonna put the link in the chat. Maybe I'll try to do that in a minute because I can't look it up while I'm talking. But anyway, Corey has a podcast called Existential, and there is an episode of that podcast where he talks about this idea of generosity. And really, it's a very thought-provoking episode where he just kind of shares his thoughts about how generosity alone is not going to move us toward a better world. He says that this one quote that he said that has stuck with me ever since. He says, "People can participate in generosity while at the same time be participating in the continued bondage and marginalization of other people." And he goes on to talk about how so often there are people who will, give large amounts of money to charitable organizations and will help feed the poor, will be generous with their money, but all the while they are still continuing to uphold the systems that oppress, to vote against policies that would actually work to alleviate the issues that they're giving their money towards in the first place. So we can throw money at something and that can make us feel real good about ourselves. But if we're continuing to uphold the very system that creates poverty in the first place, then we really need to be able to be intellectually honest and to sit back and really interrogate that and look at that. We have billionaires, which that's a whole other conversation for another day around this idea of billionaires and should they exist and all of this. But we have billionaires who will be praised for giving millions to charity, but all the while they're building their billions, they're building their wealth off of the backs of workers who can barely afford to feed their families. So we have this person who's giving away all this money, and we want to look at that and applaud that and say, that's so awesome that you're so generous. But all the while they're still upholding oppressive systems. This is what Corey means when he talks about this idea that generosity alone is not going to build a better world. And I know even for us, I know for me, it can be so easy to give money to charitable organizations and nonprofits and sort of absolve ourselves of having to get uncomfortable, of doing the hard work, of making lasting change that will uproot the systems that are causing economic equality in the first place. I know in the past, I've been guilty of that, of kind of giving money to organizations, all the while voting for policies that continue to hurt the most vulnerable. I've done that in the past. I've been guilty of, giving money to the church, but not addressing the unhealthy attachment I had in my own heart toward money and possessions. And here's the thing. Ultimately, the restoration of all things, God's desire for shalom, the thing that we are working toward, would include no one being without what they needed. I believe that God's desire for the restoration, for the flourishing of all, means that people aren't without what they need. So the flourishing of all must include economic justice. There's a quote by Brian Stevenson. He wrote a book called Just Mercy. He also is the one who, his organization spearheaded the Legacy Museum in Alabama. But he has a quote where he says this. He says, "The opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice." And that, I have a magnet on my fridge with that on it, because it really challenges me, really challenges me. And this is why I think that the conversation about money and wealth and possessions must extend beyond a conversation about generosity. And so for the past 2 weeks, we've been talking about some of what we find in the scriptures regarding money and possessions. And this week, I want to talk about how can we apply this? What small steps can we take moving forward to build a Jesus-centered financial ethic. And the goal with this whole series, in fact, it's not to be prescriptive. Quite honestly, I think we get ourselves in trouble when we approach the scriptures in this way. When we approach it from a more prescriptive, kind of rules and regulations, and here's this one thing that universally applies to every single person, because sometimes that's just not the case. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. The goal is not for those of us who have been preaching to give you the answer on how we should approach money and wealth, because quite honestly, I don't know. I'm still wrestling. I'm still trying to figure out what this looks like. When talking about money, we have to acknowledge this is not a one-size-fits-all conversation. We have people who are in very different places financially. So we have to remember that what works for one may not work for all. The goal is to continue taking steps toward building a worldview that centers the desire for the flourishing of all. So the question we should be asking when it comes to building our financial ethic, it's not what's best for me or even just what's best for my family, but the question is what's best for all? What does the most good for the most amount of people? And just kind of a side note, keeping in mind, we cannot pursue an answer for this without keeping the most marginalized at the center. Pastor Sabrina talked about this a couple weeks ago, about learning to pay attention, and that we have to keep the most vulnerable and most marginalized at the center as we are doing our own work to develop our financial ethic. So today, rather than bringing a lot of answers, I'm just simply going to share with you some things that I am considering, some questions that I've been asking, some thoughts I've been wrestling with as I work to build a Jesus-centered financial ethic. And so the first thought that I had is that I think in order to build this ethic, I think that building a better world starts with reckoning with my own relationship to money. So for you, it starts with reckoning with your own relationship to money. I think in order to build a Jesus-centered financial ethic, we first have to ask ourselves the tough questions and do some inner work on how we relate to money. So I am coming to you today as someone who is deeply wrestling with this, like right now, in real time, deeply wrestling with my relationship with money and wealth and how I want to move in the world in regards to it. I'm deeply wrestling what it looks like for me to be a Christ follower in the area of money and economic justice. And here's the thing, as long as I can remember, I have had a really complicated relationship with money, especially when it comes to money in regards to faith. And I think that this stems from a couple of different places. I think part of it is as far as like how I relate to money in general. Growing up, we didn't have a lot of money. We always had food, we had shelter, we had those things that we needed because my mom worked really hard to make sure that we did. But things were always really tight financially, and I was very aware of that. So I think that, when you grow up with money being really tight, that forms our perspective and our worldview. And then simultaneously, alongside that, I spent my middle and high school years involved in a church and a youth group that was very much centered around the prosperity gospel. So we're talking full-on name it and claim it theology. Like, this theology taught that it's God's will for all Christians to be wealthy. It was up to us to have enough faith and to believe the right things in order for us to be quote unquote blessed. Like that was the terminology that was used, was so God can bless you. But that was really like church speak for you're supposed to be rich. I sat in services where the preacher told us to write what we wanted on our offering envelope and that God would give it to us. Do you guys remember offering envelopes? You'd like write on there like the fund you wanted it to go towards, and you put your offering in the envelope if you were given cash or a check. But this preacher told us, like, literally write on the envelope what you want. So you want a new car? Write it on the envelope. You want that job or you want to get into that college? Write it on the envelope. Are you sick? Do you need healing? Write it on the envelope. Like, it was like God was this genie in the bottle. And if we had the right amount of faith, if we gave the right amount of money, then God was going to pop out of that bottle and answer our prayers and give us all of the things that our heart desired. And there are so many things wrong with this theology on so many levels, like so many. But with this, it always sat weird with me, even though I was immersed in it. It always sat weird with me because it didn't line up with my lived experience, because I knew that my mom, as well as other family members, were very generous with what they had, even though it wasn't much. Like, we're very generous with what they have. They gave money and offerings to the church, and yet we were far from being wealthy. We struggled financially. Not to mention the fact this is extremely problematic when you look at like the world's population and see how many people are living in poverty, many of whom who are practicing Christians. So it's like, what do you do with that theology then? What does that say about those people? What does that say about God? So many messages that were coming into my head in my formative years around this idea that like God wanted everyone to be wealthy. And it's taken a lot of work for me to sit with those things, to uproot all the things that were harmful and toxic or not serving me well. And I'm still doing that today. I still have moments of like feeling shame or guilt around the area that I'm not giving enough, I'm not doing enough, or I feel like I have to give money to the church out of obligation, or that God's going to be mad at me if I don't give X number of dollars. And it's hard work. And I don't know, maybe some of you are in that same place where you're really trying to undo a lot of damage that was done when it comes to your relationship with money and faith. And so I think that in order for us to move forward in building this ethic, I think we have to, as Christians, reckon with our own ideology around money. I think that we need to get honest about what thoughts and feelings come up, and then sit with them without judgment, but just acknowledging what is and interrogating, I wonder where that came from. Why do I think this thing about money? Why, when I think about money, do I feel these certain things viscerally within my body when I think about it? You know, does money make you anxious? Does it stress you out? Maybe financial resources have been scarce for you, and so you find yourself living with a mindset of scarcity because you don't know how else to see things, because you've struggled so much to get by that's really impacted how you see money and wealth. Or has your financial comfortability maybe allowed you to be insulated from the very real struggles that many others are facing? Because you've been comfortable, you've been able to sort of put blinders on either side of your head, and you haven't had to concern yourself very much with the needs of others. I think we need to genuinely, as we're moving forward, and again, this is not prescriptive, like each of us has our own work to do in this area. Like I don't know where you're at, and I don't know exactly what that means for you, but I think what's important is that we interrogate it, that we sit with those feelings and really figure out our current feelings and thoughts around money, figuring out where does that come from, and then how can we move forward? What needs to change? How can we move forward from that? We have to examine how money is affecting us. We have to question the ways that we relate to money and get to the root of it. We got to figure out our own thoughts and feelings around money and how that's impacting the financial ethic that we are holding to. So that's the first thought. Second one is this, and this is a tough one, but it's one that I'm currently really wrestling with, and it's kind of a question. So in our current societal structure, and Craig really talked a lot about this last week, about how we live under this financial structure and system of capitalism. So in our current structure that we all live in, we are all a part of, whether we like it or not. How can we resist systems of oppression in significant ways? How can we resist it? As a result of living in a capitalistic society, there are systems and structures in place that are working in opposition to the flourishing of all people. Now, I'm not here to honestly, when it comes to capitalism, that's something that I'm learning about. I'm exploring kind of exactly what it is, how it works. how people are negatively impacted by it. So there's a lot I don't know. So I'm not here to harp on that forever. And you might be someone watching today who you love capitalism. Maybe you're watching today and you loathe it. Regardless, when we take an honest look at it, it's clear that there are obvious critiques that can be made, and we can see the ways in which our current economic system is oppressing and hurting people. And if you can't see that, I would highly encourage you to just start paying attention, start listening to those on the margins who are being affected by it, to really dive in and dig deep into the ways that the system that we are in is hurting people. And because this is the system we live within, I think a lot of times our hands are a little bit tied. Like, we can't, barring moving to another country, this is the system we're in. So given that that's the case, what are some maybe small but significant ways that we can resist? I know for me, here's just some things that I've been thinking about. As I learn more and see the ways in which the pull yourselves up by your bootstraps mentality is hurting people, I can choose to resist that by advocating for and voting for social safety net programs. I can do that by voting for policies that advocate for healthcare for everyone, something that is, we have so many people who are in financial ruin because of medical debt and because of having an illness or having a lifelong disability that is ruining them financially because of the high cost of medical care. It's advocating for and voting for policies that ensure that every human has access to their basic human rights. That's one way that I believe that we can resist that system. I can resist the mentality that I must build wealth and hoard resources while many go without. This is one that I am really wrestling with. I know that there's wisdom in saving for the future and making investments and such. I get that. And also, it's where is the line between having wisdom and hoarding wealth? Of using wisdom to have a secure future and building wealth being the goal, and hoarding wealth and resources while so many go without. That part of resisting the system is working this out. I don't have a definitive answer for you, but I think we need to be asking these questions. I can make sure that my generosity is paired with an effort to dismantle systems that oppress people financially. That, if you listen to that podcast, and I see Amanda put it in the chat because Amanda is so on it all the time. But no one's saying that generosity, you shouldn't be generous. But it's got to be paired with an effort to dismantle these systems so I can make sure that I'm doing that. Another thing I can do is I can choose to educate myself about reparations, and choose to support Black people, Black businesses, Black organizations as a way to pay those reparations. I think these are just some things that have been swimming around in my head of things that I can do to kind of subvert and resist this system. I think learning to rest, is a way to subvert this system that tells us that we're supposed to be go, 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 go. The hustle culture, that the end goal is to just keep building more wealth. At what point, to what end, And so I think learning to rest, learning to be okay with having less material things, if that means more peace in our homes and in our hearts. And again, it's not prescriptive, but these are just some things that are swimming around in my head that I wanted to throw out there so you can kind of interrogate that. What are some small but significant ways that you can resist oppressive financial systems? What are some ways that you can resist kind of falling into that mentality of having to constantly strive to build more wealth, gain more possessions, have more money? How can you subvert that? Next thought. This is my third third thought here is I think that one important thing when it comes to building a Jesus-centered financial ethic is that we learn to develop a habit of communal care. We learn to develop a habit of communal care. Nothing about the Christian faith is about only doing what's best for ourselves. So when I hear people say things like that are like along those lines, that are Christians, it causes me to pause for a minute. That doesn't mean that we don't love ourselves and care for ourselves. We need to do that. But nothing about the Christian faith is about only doing what's best for ourselves. Nothing about the Christian faith says that we need to put our needs above the needs of others. It should be equal. It should be an equal playing field. Everyone's needs matter just as much. And the early church modeled this so well. When we read in the book of Acts, there was this beautiful practice of caring for the most vulnerable and combining resources so that everyone had what they needed. And in a world that tells us that it's every man for himself, we can choose to know that we belong to each other and that when one is hurting, we're all hurting. And then we can take steps toward communally caring for one another. Like Pastor Sabrina talked about a couple weeks ago, we can turn our attention to our neighbor and learn to pay attention to what's happening and what they're going through. We can listen to the most marginalized and then allow that to inform how we move forward. When we are the ones who don't have enough, because here's the thing, I think we've probably all been there at one time or another in our lives where we have desperately needed the communal care of others to be able to get by. And I know it's hard to ask for help, especially financially, because I think in a culture that tells us, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, every man for themselves, in a world that despite both simultaneously sets up all these charitable organizations to help the poor, but simultaneously also despises the poor and dehumanizes and doesn't see people who are poor as equals. I think that we have to come to a place. I think that's why it's so hard for us to ask for help, because we feel like that there's something wrong with us if for whatever reason we are unable to make enough money to make ends meet. And I'm here to tell you there's nothing wrong with you if that's the case. What's wrong is the oppressive systems that we are part of. That's the enemy. That's the problem. Greed and hoarding wealth, and that is the enemy. And so I think finding ways when there's this ethic of communal care, when we're practicing communal care, it creates an environment where those who have a need don't have to carry guilt and shame about asking for help, and that we realize that we've all been there. It's like this ebb and flow of caring for one another when we most need it. I believe that it's important that we find ways to commit to communal care, and that this will lead us closer on the path to building a Jesus-centered financial ethic. So as I kind of start to wrap things up here, I just want to end with kind of talking about Jesus. And Robin just said, that's how I feel. I hear you. Yeah, it's so hard to ask for help when we need it. And just to reiterate, it's because of oppressive systems that we have been immersed in our whole lives. That if we can learn to communally care for one another, how awesome would it be if we could develop a community here, starting here with us at Icon, where it's where we're able to voice our needs, and then people are able to step in and help meet those needs, and we can get rid of the shame, we can get rid of the guilt. We can get rid of this hierarchy of, the classism and all of that comes along with it. It's going to take all of us, working together and reassuring one another and caring for one another, because we belong to each other and we love each other. And that's what being the body of Christ is all about, is caring for one another's needs and realizing that that when one of us is hurting, we're all hurting. When one of us is struggling, we're all struggling. We have to be there and develop this ethic of communal care. And so how I kind of want to wrap this up is just kind of bringing it back to Jesus. And I'll tell you what, there's a lot of things I question, and even still, and a lot of things I'm still trying to work out when it comes to being a Christian, in a time where the word Christianity is so loaded. But one thing I always come back to is Jesus. Jesus is 100% my anchor in all of it. And so Jesus had a lot of things to say about money. And if you go and read in the Gospels, a lot of them were tough teachings that we don't talk a lot about. But Jesus had lots of things to say. He stressed the importance of not storing up treasures on earth, directly speaking to like this idea of hoarding wealth and making building wealth the goal. He flipped over tables in the temple when the disenfranchised were being taken advantage of financially. He told the rich young ruler to sell everything he had to give it to the poor. He talked about economic justice and caring for the poor and not binding our hearts to earthly possessions. And one of Jesus' statements about money that really cuts me to my core, and it's one that I have known this scripture forever and have heard it quoted a million times. But I think lately it's been settling in my heart in a new way. And it's this. He says, "No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." And that is really sitting with me lately. How often we are drawn to idolizing money and wealth and possessions. How in our culture we're caught up in this system that is really difficult to break free from. And when I think about that statement from Jesus, I also think about the statement that Paul said, where Paul said that the love of money is the root of all evil. And I cannot tell you how many times over the past few years that I have looked at Dan and I've been like, this is what Paul was talking about. When we see the way that people in power will exploit in order to gain more wealth. But I talked about earlier when we see how there's this top tiny percentage that owns more wealth than 90% of the rest of us. While there are people that are buying private jets and continuing to hoard billions of dollars, while there are people that don't even have a house to live in. The love of money is the root of all evil. And so as I look out in our world, and we can all see this to be true in so many ways. We can all see big and small ways that this works itself out to be true. We can see the ways in which people will claim to be Christian, claim that they're serving God, and yet be completely enslaved to wealth and possessions and money, and will make choices that harm others in order to maintain their power and their wealth. And we see it all around us all the time. So because of this, I think that as followers of Jesus, it's of the utmost importance that we deeply wrestle with our relationship to wealth and possessions and money. Both individually, how we personally think about it, but then also communally, how we approach this idea and how we live communally in regards to money and wealth. Because at the end of the day, money matters because money affects people. It just does. And so it matters that we learn to develop a Jesus-centered financial ethic. And so this week, I'm getting ready to close out here, but this week I just have a few questions just to leave you with, for you to ponder this week as we think about this idea of a Jesus-centered financial ethic. The first question is, how do I relate to money? Ask yourselves that. Maybe allow yourself some time this week to sit with, maybe you just this week, that's the question you're going to sit with, is how do I relate to money? kind of pinpointing the reasons and the ways that you have the thoughts and feelings around money that you do. Second question is, how can I resist systems that oppress people economically? How can I resist systems that oppress people economically? So really thinking through that concept for yourself of how can you resist? What are some things you can do to resist those oppressive systems? And then the last one is, what steps can I take to develop a habit of communal care? What steps can you take in your own life to continue developing this habit of communal care? What steps I would like to extend it to beyond just an individualistic reading of that, but how can we as a faith community develop a habit of communal care? And as you're thinking about that, if you have ideas and you're like, oh man, I would love to see our church come together and do X, Y, and Z in our community or for one another in a way of like caring for people community. If you have ideas or thoughts, we would love to hear them. You can shoot an email or message us on social media, or, you know, any ideas that you have. If you're like, man, I would really love to see the church do this. I think that's what this is all about. You know, it's about us coming together as a faith community and walking these paths together. So yeah, that is all I have for you today. I hope that there's some things that you can take with you this week and kind of sit with and ponder. Again, you know, I know sometimes with these kinds of conversations, we're like, oh, just tell me what the right thing is. And it's like, I don't know. There's just so much to it. And so I think that's part of being a community of faith, is that we work these things out together, and it's not going to shift and change overnight. It's about taking small steps toward what that looks like. Making this complete 180 or changing all these things, but it's about just sitting with these questions and finding simple, small steps we can take each day toward building a Jesus-centered financial ethic. So that is all. I'm so grateful for all of you for joining us today. If you have a chance, listen to that podcast. The link is in the chat. Listen to all his podcasts because they're just all amazing. But this one in regards to finances, I think. Let's see. Can you repeat the questions one more time? Yes, I can. Give me 1 second because I closed my computer, and so I need to get here we go. Okay. The questions are, and here's what I'm going to do actually. I am going to live type these into the chat because I can do that. And it'll be coming from like Dan's icon, but it's me. It's not Dan, it's me. So here we go. How do I relate to money? There's the first one. And then, how can I resist? Oh my goodness, and I also can't type, so. Okay, the next question is, how can I resist systems that oppress people economically? And then the next question is, what steps can I take to develop a habit of care? What steps can I take to develop a habit of communal care? So there are the questions. So you can go ahead and write those down, type them out on your phone. If you're like me and you're on a keyboard, it takes you like 10 minutes to type because, yeah, I'm a bad typer. Plus I'm like trying to think and type at the same time. So anyways, so those are the questions. And yeah, I hope that you all have a fantastic week. And again, and I didn't say this in the beginning, but I want to reiterate, if you are in a place right now where you need communal care and where you are going, I just don't know how I can, make ends meet. Reach out to us and let us know. I know that's really hard to do, and again, we are a little church with not a lot of means. And so we I can't promise that we can cover a lot, but I do know that as a community, that we all together have the resources and the ability to be able to care for one another. We just do. And so if that's something that you need, please reach out. We would love to be able to chat with you and to be able to assess ways that, that we can be helpful, that we can come alongside and provide that care that we've all needed. And so, yeah, Sabrina said, thank you. We'll have all the answers next week. Okay. If only it were that simple, right? All right. Well, I love all of you so much. So grateful for you for joining us here. And I hope that you all have a fantastic week full of goodness and joy. And we will see you next Sunday. Have a great one, everyone.